pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, nation under God, indivisible, justice for all. Who would like to say the grace?
Bow our heads for a minute. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you've done for us, and we ask for your continued hand, protection over each and every one the cellular patrol as we go about trying to help our country and gain favor. Lord, please be with our troops and their families. Lift them up to you, keep them safe, we pray, and help us to have a good meeting this evening. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so today we have general meeting, emergency services as a general subject. Let's start with status on the aircraft. One.
So we make a long story short, we did a break-in flight of the engine for 4-3 Charlie Papa, our Turbo 206, last Wednesday. And the flight went pretty good. We followed the procedures that we needed to follow to breaking it in. So there's a procedure in the AIF for the next 30 hours that it gets flown, that they want you to do that checklist as you break in the engine for the next 30 hours. So that's a long time. We need to change the hour at 10 hours, 25 hours, and 50 hours. And unfortunately, after we got our flight, there was some paperwork, and an AD was found that it had not been complied with yet. It has to deal with the turbocharger bracket on the engine, that it needs to be replaced, to sum it up. And so they're in the process of ordering a new bracket. We don't understand why the engine shop wouldn't have supplied that bracket, or along with for the engine installation kit. So they're not too happy at the FBO because it's going to take now about 8 hours to take it apart and put it all back together. So they're waiting on that part. And another thing that we noticed in flight as we were going about taking pictures and monitoring the engine is that the turbine inlet temperature gauge reading seemed to stop working, or did not come up to be what would be a normal, heat range. And so that's written up too, and that's a groundable thing because it's in the pilot operating book as one of those items that you need to have for VFR day and night flight, along with IFR also. So there's those two things, and the oil change that I was talking about. And as I understand it, they're planning on transitioning or moving our Turbo 206 to San Diego Squadron. And so they're just chomping at the bit, trying to get the plane back in flying status so they can fly it, break it in, and all that. So it's sitting up there in the top ramp waiting for the things to get done as I just described them. The other aircraft, as I've been talking over the last couple weeks with Colonel Pruzak and Colonel Vita about this airplane and the transitioning of it, the short story is it sounded like they were willing to leave 743, the 182 G1000, here at Riverside for some period of time, so we actually have an airplane, because right now Group 3 does not even have an airplane other than that, and that's not even ours, apparently, Group 3. So they're talking about leaving that aircraft here for some extended period of time, hopefully. Cross our fingers, because I'm in the process of getting my Form 5, and I need to have an airplane to fly and get checked out on. So in a nutshell, I guess that's about it.
And 9700, is it still here?
No. Yeah, I believe that they flew it to Fullerton for some reason, and then it's going to be going back up north. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
Any question?
Did you say it was an oil change at 10, 25, and 50?
yes.
Almost got it. That was me. Okay. As you may know, I went to Oshkosh last week. If you'd like, I can share my experience on that. If you have any other suggestions on other topics, we can go over that, over your suggestions. So, what would you say? Would you like to hear a story? Okay, so what happened is originally I was hoping to fly my own airplane, which is Mooney, and that didn't work out because my radio started to act out and there was no time to troubleshoot it. So I called out on Facebook in SoCal Aviators group and suggested that I tag along with someone who may need a second pilot. I happened to find an instructor, CFII, out of Fullerton, who was going to travel there on his Cessna 182. Basic avionics is a six-pack with Garmin 530 WAS. That was a great opportunity. I took my stepson with me, and he was flying together with the Cessna group, Cessna to Oshkosh. They were staging in Juneau, Wisconsin, so I can actually share the flight plan and what went into it in terms of planning. It was definitely an interesting experience flying for me. It was first true cross country in my flying career. We covered pretty long range. I will just share the whole window. So altogether we departed on Wednesday, July 20th. The first leg was from Fullerton to Vernal, Utah, and it was the reason we selected the north route to cross Rockies because of the weather system in the south. There was a lot of thunderstorms in the south route. Even the terrain may look less intimidating in the south, but the temperatures were higher, a lot more moisture, and more thunderstorms. So the pilot who I was flying with, Mike Jesh, he is ATP. He is flying actually for American Airlines for over 35 years, and he is a master instructor for GA. He was very comfortable with the north route, and he actually teaches the mountain flying, so it was extremely interesting for me to experience firsthand. He allowed me to fly the airplane all the way to Oshkosh and back, with exception of the final leg from Juneau to Oshkosh. The reason being I'm not rated for formation flying, and it was a formation flight with over 100 different Cessna aircraft in a group. So on Wednesday, July 20th, we departed at 11:23 a.m. local time, and it took us 4 hours 50 minutes to get to Vernal. It was fairly uneventful flight. There was weather system in that area too, but it was rather broken, so smaller cells spread across the region. We have had a pretty good idea from radar input on what we would be dealing with. We avoided all of them with a good margin of safety on all sides of those cells we have faced. The only negative side was we had a bit of a turbulence, so we're a bit chopped to maybe light to medium turbulence in some areas. And overall flight level we took was about 9,500 and navigated different passes in the area with pretty good ground clearance. I learned how to fly in the mountains on one side of a canyon to give yourself plenty of room to escape. Mike continuously reinforced number of points along the route, and his Cessna is very capable. It's not stock engine, it's actually Continental engine with STC with increased horsepower, so exceptional performance on that aircraft. So we arrived to Vernal, had nice dinner and took a good rest overnight, and then departed next day fresh from Vernal to the next stop. This was a long leg, probably the longest of the ones we have flown. Altogether was 5 hours and 21 minutes. We selected a small airport serving agricultural aviation in Storm Lake, Iowa, for one reason: cheapest fuel in the whole nation. It was $4.65 a gallon, and I didn't believe how much I paid. It was a little bit over $200 to fill it up. It was great. Yeah, so flying in the mountains was fun, good scenery, and I'll share some pictures. But once we crossed the Rockies, the terrain got flat and more flat, and then it was just nothing, just a flat land with patches of green, more green, or some yellow patches here and there. So not so many pictures on that part of flying. So flight was uneventful. Weather was much nicer in the morning. We didn't have practically any turbulence. When we were descending approximately 6,500 to 4,500 coming into Storm Lake, we had probably wind shear, so it was bumpy coming 2,000 feet lower, but nothing major. Most of the airports we've been to, with exception of Juneau in Wisconsin and Oshkosh, of course, very light air traffic. Another thing which was my personal experience I'd like to share: flying from Vernal for a good portion of this 5-hour flight, there was no radio coverage. Like, you could not get any flight following. So we were just flying, monitoring on guard, and seeing not a lot of traffic on our path. Once we landed and refueled in Storm Lake, our next stop was selected to be Madison. It was a short flight comparing to previous, only a little bit over an hour. The reason we went there were a number of aircraft on the way to Oshkosh stopping there for burgers and other kind of grill food, corn, and just good company. There was the B-29 Strata Fortress aircraft staying there before going to Oshkosh. They were giving the rides, like a 1 hour long ride around the airport, and we had a good time. We didn't pay anything for food. We just donated some money to the FBO who was hosting the event, and met a lot of interesting people. So plenty of interesting aircraft. I'll also share the pictures on that. B-29 was impressive. It was the one called the Dog. I'll also show pictures for that. We camped at Madison before our next flight on Friday morning to Juneau. Juneau was selected by Cessna to Oshkosh as a staging airport. It was able to host all the aircraft flying in with that group. Overall, a little bit over 110 different Cessnas came in, 150s and all the way up. And they were parking in groups based on type of aircraft. Many people camped. There was food organized by Cessna to Oshkosh organization. They had a nice briefing the morning before the departure from Juneau to Oshkosh. It was very interesting to listen to that and just to observe how the whole fly-in was organized. The whole caravan was broken into elements of 3 airplanes. There were leads and of course 2 aircrafts behind. The plan was to keep 2,000 feet distance between elements, and if I'm not mistaken, something about 250 feet between the aircraft. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. But for me, it was first time experience flying in such a close formation. So the overall quality of departure and flight to Oshkosh was pretty reasonable. There were some bumps here and there. Some aircraft was late starting up, so they were placed in a different element. They were actually changing some of that stuff in real time. Looked slightly messy on departure, but things straightened out, and it was uneventful arrival to Oshkosh. It took approximately, the distance from Juneau to Oshkosh is very small, so actually I need to keep up. So this is a track from Madison to Juneau, pretty straight. I also managed to get, I think, about 5 hours of hood time while flying on all these legs. So under the supervision of instructor, was great experience. I significantly improved my instrument cross-check and hand flying skills. He didn't have autopilot, so it was all hand flying all the way. So from Juneau to Oshkosh was a pre-negotiating flight path with FAA. They had letter of agreement negotiated in advance, time slot when we depart and when the whole group supposed to arrive. The pictures will speak for themselves. When I get there, was very interesting. Landing was on 36 left and right. 36 right is actually a taxiway, which is converted to a runway for the purpose of arrival. Was very interesting for me to observe as well. So it's a very narrow so-called runway. So one of the right aircraft in the element was landing on 36 right, and 2 aircraft landings on 36 left. Because of the tight formation, we were landing long. The element behind us was landing in the middle of the runway, and the element next was landing short on the runway. Upon arrival, the whole group had designated parking for camping at the North 40 area, with tent established and electricity, and breakfast and dinner was served, but I didn't stay with the group under the aircraft. I decided I will, since I was flying with my son, we chose to stay in dorms at University of Wisconsin. So I'll switch to some pictures. Any questions so far?
Where did the pre-brief go on for the formation flight? Where was the pre-brief held?
At Juneau, they had a hangar with...
Where you started off then for your input from there, everybody met there?
Yes, correct. So the deadline to arrive to Gathering Airport was end of the day on Friday, and the departure was in the afternoon on Saturday. And our time slot was from 2:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We had an hour to get all the airplane from point A to point B. Maybe an hour and a half. I could be wrong on that. How many of you have been to Oshkosh? Oh, actually, Arnold and I met there, and it was fun. I also met Trent, his son. So we watched an air show with you, and the next day we watched an air show with Trent. Okay. And if you'd like, I can share the album with all the pictures. So the departure from Fullerton was very straightforward, direct line, more or less, to Vegas. The aircraft is climbing great. We crossed the mountains approximately over Lake Arrowhead. The flight was, I believe it's Lake Arrowhead. So at that point we were at 9,500, and we maintained 9,500 until we essentially were ready to descend to Vernal. I got a lot of interesting details on how to handle Garmin 530, what to do and not to do when creating flight plan, and most of it is directly applicable to Garmin G1000. So difference between direct enter versus direct enter, whether to load an approach or whether to activate an approach. So I need to now practice it to make sure I actually memorize and make it motor skill rather than trial and error approach. This is close to Vegas. We were flying south of Vegas, so we didn't touch Class Bravo. We can see those solar farms. My stepson fell asleep. So those are solar farms left of I-15 as you drive to Vegas. You can probably turn the sound off. We don't need to listen to that. So pretty boring landscape for now. I'll pass on that. It was getting more interesting as we were flying into Utah. So here we can tell that mountains are essentially at the same or high actually level as our aircraft, and we were flying on one side of a canyon, so continuously exercising simple mental task where we would land aircraft if anything goes wrong. Some areas were pretty interesting. It would be hard to land an aircraft there, at least for me, but Mike sweared he would definitely keep us alive at least. The clouds were developing, and there was some rain showers in the area. So here we are flying along Zion Park, and we can see the highway there. We went over St. George Airport, tried to keep as many airports on our flight path as practically possible, but the flight path was fairly straight. We did some weather avoidance flying, and we did some canyon flying to get to the lower terrain. I believe this is closer to Vernal area, where terrain became a little bit flatter. My stepson looks pretty green. He was sick of flying at that point, and he was continuously asking how long more we should go. But for us in the front, it was problem. So he was miserable there. But luckily for him, the rest of the travel was fairly easy, since morning flying and flying over the flat terrain, you get calmer weather, and there was not a lot of vertical air movement. So this is Vernal FBO. We called ahead, made sure there is fuel. They met us, gave us free car, and we stayed at the town, which one thing, if you ever go there, there is a great Mexican place called Plaza Mexicana. Amazing food, humongous portions, like each plate is this big. So share. we really didn't know what we go for. If we were flying immediately after, I wouldn't go for it, but actually it was good. Our stomachs managed it just fine. Yeah, he was so sick he couldn't eat up until maybe 2 hours later, so he managed to. That was 1976. Yeah, it's they have a club, 3 people in a club, well maintained. Interesting story. Just the day before, on Tuesday, he went for cheap gas to Corona. He filled up, and the starter didn't work. Yeah, that's what happened to my airplane not so long ago. So he managed just to meet a friend of his at Corona. They ran to get a new starter and found a mechanic at the field to install it right there. Flew it back to Fullerton. So it was interesting. He even managed to get there on Tuesday for our meeting for pre-flight planning. So we met Tuesday night. That's why I couldn't make the meeting here. To review the route, check the weather briefing, and all the good stuff. So now we are flying from Vernal to Storm Lake, and you will see how terrain is changing. So far it's pretty cool, nice looking mountainous terrain. My stepson is asleep. Yes, so what we did in Vernal, we went to the pharmacy, got him ginger pills, and either that helped or the weather was better. I don't know.
Peppermint. Peppermint suckers.
Yes.
That's what you need.
So if anyone is interested in geology, I'm pretty basic from my geology knowledge, but to me it was impressive how different rocks have different colors, and even looks like the same rock, but it's whiter on the top and more red down below. So some interesting events were happening over time. It was amazing how much the kid could sleep. He slept all day long and all night long. Yes. Yeah. So we changed turns. Sometimes I would land in a plane, sometimes he would land. So basically helped each other as much as we could. But I have a lot of flying time in 182 now. I spoke over 300 hours in the flight, and now I'm about 300 finish overall, and about 220 PAC or so. So I can do cadet rides. So it's interesting to see where there is water, there is more green, no water, it's pretty dead. Not much to do. Somewhere, see the terrain is getting flatter. There will be more vegetation over time, very green. So here I believe we made it to Minnesota by now.
The circles, the circles are where plantings are. The pump is in the middle. It takes 24 hours to make one complete turn for water and sprinklers.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Each one is basically 1 mile square. So it sits on a 1 mile square plot of land, really. That's how big they are.
Yeah.
So you can figure out where you are by just putting squares and circles, how fast you're going through, because each one's a mile in length.
Yeah, that's a good observation, and I believe,
And then you get 4 of those as one section.
yeah, I believe these squares are the same, 1 mile each. I don't know. Yeah, he's smiling more. You can see that Cessna is very capable. It was packed tight. The rear was he wasn't very specific on which STC they had applied, and he wasn't even clear. He's like, it's over 260 horsepower. And the envelope is interesting. The weight and balance, it has a bump on top of the standard envelope, and we were not even touching the standard envelope on our weight and balance. So also what helped, he has long range fuel tanks. So we could essentially, we would land with 2 hours of fuel left on the longest leg. So pretty capable aircraft. So just took a snap for my family to explain what we are navigating with. Here we landed at Storm Lake. It was hot and humid, so soaking wet when we get there. And I think I didn't take picture, but there was a whole bunch of air tractors parked there in front of the fuel pumps. And when we landed, they were having a lunch break. And as we up, they started their routine. They were departing one another. It's amazing how loud those things are. They run on jet fuel. It's turboprops. Sound like a jet engine pretty much.
Were they loading them right from parking where they were?
They were already loaded.
They were already loaded.
Yeah, and they were ready to fly.
They taxied for lunch and then took off.
Yeah, their lunch place was just in front of their airplanes, on the other side of the fuel pumps. And they were just sitting there having lunch, and when they finished, they took off one after another. Very tight. The airport didn't have taxiways, so they had to back taxi to the end
How
of
do you
the
cross
runway.
just a circle?
I don't know.
Still run parallel lines and just start early and shut it off.
Maybe they do turnaround point. I don't know. Lots of them. So more squares, very flat. He is out all the time. So this is a stop at Mason. You can probably name some of those interesting aircrafts. Yeah, Mr. Mulligan, and it's a replica of original airplane. This
Did you
is,
take pictures of the crop dusters?
I forgot.
That's a Russian, what do they call it, an Antov?
No, actually it's Norseman.
Really?
And apparently it's the only one flying in the United States. So my instructor's friend, Jolly Lucas, was flying this airplane from California to Oshkosh. So the radial engine was very oily. This is an interesting aircraft in superior condition, like brand new paint and everything. Nice pictures there. Here is B-29. They were pre-flighting it before taking people on rides. And I tried to get inside on a tour, but every time I approached it, they were either busy with pre-flight or people were already inside and they wouldn't let more, so I couldn't get in. In great condition. And the story behind this airplane, the group of people who they found it at the airplane cemetery in Arizona, took it to the airport and worked over 10 years on restoration. So brought it back to life, took parts from many other B-29s here and there, rebuilt number of parts. For the starting video, engine start, I'll turn the sound on. That's pretty impressive.
I had a question for you, trivia question. Bob might know this, but during World War II, I was having this discussion with my wife the other night. The B-17s and the B-29s, how many of those were manufactured and then shot down during World War II?
Oh my gosh, tens of thousands.
Thousands, right?
Yeah, tens of thousands of the B-17 because they kept coming up with newer models, more armament. And you know, it's really a pretty small airplane. An AD carried more armament, more bombs than the B-17 did. But you know, they started off with the C, the Ds, and they finally got up to the Gs, which were remote controlled turrets kind of thing. But I want to
People
say
just don't realize.
20 or
36,000.
36,000 in the B-17. I mean, you can probably look it up. And how many were shot down? I'd say probably a third of them.
Yeah, actually, they mentioned at Oshkosh that approximately 50% of B-17s didn't survive the war. So its survival rate on bombers was pretty low. B-29s, if I'm not mistaken, didn't get much of traction in the war because it was built at the very end of it, if I'm not mistaken. So he was mostly involved in Korean War. And there is a very cool story, maybe Bob knows, about B-29 having emergency landing in far east of Russia, one of the airports, and Soviet Union released the crew back to US, but they held the airplane. And what Stalin ordered is to make exact copy of that airplane. And when Stalin says exact, it has to be exact. So one of the wings had a very round and perfect hole straight through the wing. So the engineers were scratching their heads very hard trying to figure out what was the purpose of that hole in the wing. So they couldn't, but the order was to make exact copy. So the airplane which was a copy of it was Tu-4, all of them for a period of time. First series of that aircraft had the hole in the wing.
Actually, the B-29, Hitler had developed a buzz jet, if I can use that word. They knew that it was in existence, and they were waiting for it to hit the European area. But his jets were designed, they were like buzz bombs. They were just little short things. The wings were probably smaller than this room, and it had 6 or 8 basic rockets in the wings that fired vertical. And the object of this jet was to make one pass with only the amount of fuel that they had. Make one pass under the B-29 and then launch these in sequence. And as they flew under, it would hit the bottom, and meantime they'd be past it by the time they came down. But it never got to futation.
Right.
The war came to an end, and they never even launched the buzz bomb or the small jets that they had. It was just a one-pilot jet that was probably 10 by 15 in length, smaller than a Messerschmitt.
Yeah.
But they had some interesting stuff. We copied a lot of stuff from Germany.
And so did Russians, MiG-17 was heavily developed based on research done by German engineers on jet engines and the wing configuration, etc., which gave plenty of advantage in developing that.
Trivia, I can say this now, that the B-2, some of the stealth characteristics of that design came from Russia's engineering of radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, my uncle killed in the B-29.
cleared the land, they were cleared to take off, and then land right on top of them. I never, of course, knew that uncle, of course.
Right.
But, and then another uncle flew on those in the mid-50s as a weather airplane. They flew right straight into typhoons out of Hickam Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the cockpit and you look at where the pilot sits, he doesn't have much forward visibility. He really doesn't. It's really limited. I think this went over to the Arch Museum, isn't it? B-29. You know, I think they have one over March 29. Yeah. There's very little forward visibility because that cockpit, the pilot, and they sit so far back from the nose.
Yeah. I believe there is B-29 at China airport, which can be visited. So it's not flyable, but it's there. And we were sitting in the front row and watching the B-29 getting pre-flight. Let's see. They were just initially they rotated the engines and then they tried them all in a sequence. Then they started engines from inboard out. So for now they are not starting yet. So here I believe they will.
Internet says 12,731 B-17 were manufactured, 4,750 were shot down.
4,000, so roughly 30%. So yeah.
37%.
And I think this engine here is a 4,500. It has 3 banks of 9. 3 banks of 9 in it.
Yes, and the engines are so far out, the outboard ones, they did the pre-flight and then they had to shut them down for taxi. They started them only at the ramp because they could damage the taxi lights.
The other thing interesting in the B-29 is to get from the front cockpit to the tail, you're in a tunnel on a slide like a sled. Because the pressurization center, but they wanted that. That was the only way to walk through that thing.
Yeah, this one is not pressurized. They did not invest in restoration of pressurization system, but the original one was pressurized aircraft.
And you also got to know that all these engines for high altitude were always turbocharged, running off the exhaust, but they run 145 octane. Nowadays we're 100 octane, and so they're very limited in what they can do because of the lesser octane availability.
Wow.
Rich was 145, lean was 115 through carburetors. That's why you only had 2 settings on the carburetor left. You had rich, cruise, and off. That was it.
Yeah, I'll skip to the.
Did they use lead air on the turbochargers to pressurize them?
No, they're using, it comes off the exhaust system. They ran 2 turbos for each bank of 9 off in the back.
It was amazing to see the takeoff.
Sound.
Yeah, the sound was just unbelievable. The cheapest ticket to go on this thing was 750, and the most expensive was 1,500.
Did they let you handle the yoke if you...
No, you're just a passenger.
So, you know, if you look at the horsepower rating, it's probably about 4,500 horsepower
per engine.
and now you're at 100 octane. You're lucky to get 3,000 out of those suckers, more likely. You can figure it out. They have a program in here that will tell you where you are.
No bums though.
Yeah, some interesting.
Cut down, lightweight, and then they have modern instruments in it for navigation, etc.
So it was Julie, yeah, Julie Park Air Show. She was there.
You know, and she's at that's close to I see people get to it. Man, at March Air Force Base, you couldn't get within 20 feet of that airplane. Oh, she breaks the hell about it.
I like this one. Mark 1 Mod 0 converter converts dollars into smoke and noise. That was on T6, I believe. And I'll skip a little bit, fast forward to our travel to Oshkosh. Yeah, so here we basically arrived. This is the good view of Juneau airfield. So there are 2 runways, and we actually used the short, actually half of our group used short runway, and the other half used long runway, because while we were departing, the winds changed. The storm started to come over the area, and that created a little bit of a separation between 2 parts of our group. And basically, that's one group of Cessnas sitting on the ramp.
When they flew together, did they step up or step down?
Step up, step down, in terms of what?
Formation flying. Normally, on a high wing, it's kind of hard to sit like this. They do step up so they can see lead.
Yes.
The wings above them and him looking down.
Yeah.
But if you're in the Bonanza or anything that's low wing, you're back here on a step down.
Yeah, it was step up, so the rear was higher.
Yep.
And
gives the pilot more visibility of where lead is.
some elements were flying better than others. We had one pilot who was new to formation flying. It was his first mass arrival, so he was a little bit playing catch-up game with us, but eventually he caught up. Here is a 150, I believe, painted
It's a
in.
lot slower than 182.
Yeah, and they basically make groups. Slow aircraft go first, then faster and faster. We had elements from A to Z and from AA to OO. Some elements stayed on the ground, but they didn't change the names. Some nice sunset pictures. We got lucky with the weather to the most part. Not a lot of humidity, just on arrival to Oshkosh, and the whole week at Oshkosh was perfect weather. So see, one element departed, and we were waiting for our turn and started our roll.
I had a friend that I used to ski with. He's a retired guy from American Airlines, and he has a Mooney. I don't believe he's flying anymore. But they taxied him in a, not really a culvert, but a swale,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't really know much what was going on at the time. I mean, he didn't feel anything change. He gets back to Hanford in Connecticut, and he lands and starts pushing his airplane. He looks at the tips, and they're folded back. They ran him into the soil, unbeknownst to him.
Yeah.
So he ended up tearing down the engine and buying a new prop for his Mooney.
So here how the departure.
It didn't change the airspeed. But you know, he was kind of irritated that they never said anything, and they just, because they have some of these swales, they park and they're trying to get him out of there. So instead of looking at it and be coming off on a different angle at it, instead of perpendicular, they just taxied him straight into this thing. And first the nose wheel was down, and as he's taxied up, it hit the ground.
And he took a flight and didn't notice the props were bent?
Well,
Not after you pre-fly, they want you out of there. I'll tell you, they want you in and out.
yeah, the speed of the operation and the scale is just mind-blowing. So this is how it actually looked on our formation departure. Many aircraft are still on the ground, and lead is already about 1/3 down the road. This is our front element ahead of us, and this is our element. So the left one, he's higher than us, and this is a right element, and it was 2,000 feet MSL, 90 knots for everyone. So speed control is very important. The altitude control is extremely important.
Yeah, I get down and I'd be flying at half flaps with my Bonanza.
Yes.
Even with a T-34, I was at
Yeah,
They were at 130.
Bonanzas prefer flying with Moonies.
Yeah.
Moonies approach speed is high actually. So I believe Mooney approach is 120 versus 90 on Cessnas.
Yeah, but if you're doing this approach, 110 is marginal, is really what you want to do. And I found I used to take and fly tight turns and what have you, practicing for my check rights and what have you, at high speed, and I decided to just take it, slow it down. The last time I held altitude, speed does a lot for you.
Yeah. So here we are a beam of Juneau, which we just departed. Was a big loop just to get everyone in the air.
It's kind of a small airport, really.
Yeah, it's not big. There are many of them in the country. It's amazing how many. You rarely fly and don't see an airport in a line of sight. So just here, see, like mushrooms. And here we are actually close this, guys. Approaching Oshkosh. I'll fast forward a bit. And there was a SIGMET issued for Oshkosh, and we came in just on time. You'll see what kind of weather we got just an hour after landing. It was amazing. So many people rushed to put the tents up, and they were sorry about that very soon. So some of the elements already landed, and here is Oshkosh in front of us. So very, very interesting experience. And then I looked at on ADSB data for Fisk arrival. That was complete. It was controlled mess. So how many aircraft are there and how close they are without much of many unexperienced. My friend flew in his Mooney, and he wasn't formation flying trained, so he didn't go with Mooney Caravan. He flew in Fisk arrival. So his leg before Oshkosh was about 3 hours long. He arrived to Fisk area, and he was held in over the lake for an hour and a half, waiting for his turn. And just when he was allowed to go, some no-radio airplane snuck in front of him, and that airplane was allowed to go and land in Oshkosh, and my friend was diverted to Appleton. So planning ahead is important, and lesson learned: if you fly Fisk, arrive fresh with enough fuel to have time and time to spend in a holding place somewhere. And study NOTAM. The NOTAM of, like, I believe 30 something pages.
Awful low at this point here.
Yes.
Awful low. It looks like you're about 800 feet above the ground, going straight level to try to get to the airport. That's not a good sign there.
That's not me landing, so I have an excuse.
I mean, if the engine quits, he must like a lot of vegetables.
Right. There are
He's going to get a lot of vegetables.
green beans and lots of corn, mouthful full of corn.
Actually, a corn stalk will do damage to your wings, believe me.
Yeah, so our landing was interesting. So my instructor, no, we didn't. He was planning to land long, but he floated a little bit too long. So I will turn the sound on at the last moment. There was he probably will replace his tires after that landing, because I was questioning if we're gonna make the turn. It was tight. Lots of tire screeching.
You can land very short if you maintain a 3-degree glide slope, which is the standard glide slope. A Ford ship can start at 300 feet.
So you already see how many airplanes parked on the left. It was Saturday. Sunday, it was double that. He was aiming past midfield, and he floated a little bit farther than that and landed a little bit too hot. And then the element before us probably had similar issues because they didn't turn. They stopped at the end of the field. And I'm watching like, are we going to hit the guy or are we going to smash some of those landing lights? And it's still floating. And then finally coming down, but a little bit too fast. Bam. Yep.
Are they staggered to share the runway?
Yes, so we are on the right, the left is on the left side. See, the aircraft stopped right there. And we're like, I'm like, He's like, oh, I was so ashamed of this landing. So anyway, so the taxiing was uneventful. A lot of Civil Air Patrol volunteers. Lots of. Yes, he was a little bit too fast. Yes. We debriefed after that. He's like, don't do this, and do this. And people sitting just on the side of a taxi and watching airplanes. Yeah, there was a group that were actually putting numbers up. And we are taxiing and our group is still landing. So the good thing about mass arrival, you actually have your time block and you are not rushed very much. Pretty good pace, I would say, with some practice. Definitely, my objective is I met Muni Caravan guys and I plan to actually engage with that group and see if I can by next year fly in their formation. So we'll see. So, and let me show you the rain. Okay, we made it, we're happy. Some tips, put something under the wheel. So if rains heavily, it doesn't drown, right? And that's us on a bus going out of the airport. And we see that those clouds are getting uglier and uglier. And the dorms look nice and clean. I actually liked it. The negative side, I got non-air conditioned room.
It looks like every Soviet apartment complex I've ever seen.
Yeah, I guess they make them similar. For some reason I don't have a rain video, but it was strong. So some fast forward here. The air show was great, and I'll share the link to the album. Welcome to see it at your leisure time. Lots of interesting aircraft, good presence of military, Air Force. F-35 was flying every day, and sometimes two of them. They make a lot of noise. They may be hard to see on radar, but it's very easy to hear, especially close to the ground. So they were marshalling. Yeah, they had humongous force. They had radio support. They were also staged in the area in case of there is a problem and someone is landing off field. They were ready. Met a few people from those squadrons. Lots of good stuff. MiG-17 was great. They were performing every air show. And the pilot who was flying did 0.91 Mach in the low pass. That was cool. That afterburner looks like a torch. Some interesting historical aircraft. This is a replica of Yak-9, the Soviet-built World War II fighter. And there are a couple of Messerschmitts. This particular one was dug out of the swamp at the border of Russia and Estonia in 1990. And you can see how it looked like when they found it. It still had the prop on it, bent a little bit backwards. This is how it looked before the restoration. And what's amazing about this aircraft, this is the only aircraft restored which runs Daimler-Benz engine, and not its own engine, because that rotted beyond restoration point, but same series of the engine. So it's very close to actual aircraft. And they were having a judging contest on which aircraft was restored the best, and I believe this one won the prize. So very cool event, interesting aircraft. This one was had red stars all over it, but then they put Ukrainian flag and Ukrainian signage over it. So, any questions? We are at our end of the meeting time, but I can continue if you'd like.
The one picture that's half there on the left top, well, that's a JD.
Yeah.
Maybe at the test airplane.
Lots of Corsairs, very great condition. Lots of many Yak 52s and Yak 51, I believe, the one which is a tail dragger. I should know better my my own history.
Some of the airplanes you can't keep up with them nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, so here is F-35 flying formation with what is this? Yeah, these are Mustangs. Here is DC-3, I believe. Oh, I got lucky actually. At our Cessna Tosh course, there was a drawing of different prizes, and first prize drone was from Aspen Avionics, and it was interflight on with the formation flying Aeroshell group. And one of our pilots won it, but he couldn't make it. It was on Wednesday. So he gave it to my stepson, and they didn't let my stepson fly because he's 15. So I ended up flying. That was a lot of, here I am actually, strapped in. That's a T6. It's a very good, first time me flying in T6, and of course I didn't touch controls. There was no stick, in fact, in the back cabin. I could touch pedals, but I was sitting pretty fast.
But they wouldn't let, how old did you have to be? 16 or 18?
18.
Oh, that's a bummer. If there's no controls back there.
Yeah, I mean, come on, I would sign his life away. Who cares? He would have experience of a lifetime. So we did the loop and a barrel exiting the loop. So that was a lot of fun. And that was close formation fly. So after the Cessna, I was like, oh, this is like up close and personal. Yeah, it's a nice group of pilots. I learned that each pilot owns the airplane, and they have sponsors helping maintaining the aircraft and keeping them airworthy, etc. Very for me, first time there, biggest event in my lifetime. So look forward to repeating it at some point. Not sure next year, but maybe a year after next. It's pretty expensive to get there. Overall cost on this 182, we split the fuel price. Basically, we didn't share engine time. I paid about $850 to $900 one way, and he paid the other way. So, yeah.
Considering the current pricing, you guys are leaning for like 65% cruise?
Yes, 65% cruise most of the time. It was sipping about a little bit over 10 gallons an hour, sometimes 11 and a half.
What were you getting average cruise?
Coming there, we had more of a tailwind, so sometimes up to 140 knots ground track, and coming back was a little bit of a headwind, so sometimes 100, barely 120. So, and we experimented, went up, checked the airspeed, went down. It's better here, but a little bit bumpy, but it was fun. Yeah, lots of interesting people. I met people from Germany, from South. Oh, there was a group of Sling aircraft, experimental, built in South Africa, and actually flew from South Africa all the way to Oshkosh. That's real cross country. Expensive. They had good sponsors. My stepson wasn't so much interested in airplanes, but he found himself in workshops. He spent all week welding, and he did actually an amazing job. He graduated making very complex tubing connections. So actually, I'll show you. He may become an MD. He's more interested in mechanics than airplanes on that side. So the guy who ran the workshop said, "Hey, I would sign off this work for airworthiness on the spot." So let me find that example. Yeah, so I'll share the link again in the chat for in Teams. So you're welcome to look through the pictures. It's a lot of them. Definitely not enough time to cover in an hour. A lot of interesting aircraft. There was MiG-29, which was sold by Ukraine to Paul Allen, and Paul Allen sold it to this new owner who uses it as private personal commuter plane. He is a billionaire, a 39-year-old. The guy will be first civilian to actually be a commander on a space mission. Jared Isaac, here he is. Yeah, and very easy to see. Apparently it burns heavy black smoke. Maybe not the right jet fuel, I don't know. Maybe the Russian fuel is different, I have no idea. Actually, I have never seen it in Russia. This was my first time seeing it up close and personal. And they had a group of other Russian trainers. I believe these are L-39s, yeah, I think so.
L-39 looks like an A4.
All right.
We had A4,
so you know this aircraft. That was very interesting demonstration, the capabilities of this aircraft. It's airplane / helicopter.
Did they have the guy there that's in a helicopter does loops from the fuse?
Yes, there was a Red Bull team doing all kinds of crazy maneuvers in the helicopter, loops.
He's got special authorization to do that. Nobody else has that I know of. He had to prove to him that it could be done. FAA wouldn't allow it.
The air show was amazing, especially the night one. That's a departure. So I somehow fast forwarded his welding work, but basically when I looked at my cage in the Mooney and how all the tubes are welded together, he did a pretty good job for the 1 week welder. Should be somewhere. There was of course build an airplane in a week. So this is day 3 of the build out. I did my portion of work by putting one of the rivet in inside it, just for sake of fun. I watched, I think, 3 air shows, and they were every day during the day, and 2 night air shows, one on Wednesday and one on Saturday. They pretty much do the same routine, but they light it up. They put some fireworks on the airplane.
No, they had that at Redlands Airport for an air show. And they did it
Oh,
around 8 o'clock
this
at night,
one
so
is
the guys
cool.
got licensing, and they have special dividers in the wingtips, and they set off these flares. And the guy does aerobatics and stuff with that flies.
I mean, it sounds cool, but knowing that most of the aerobatics they do by visual reference, like what are they doing at night?
Good point.
Terrifying.
That's a scaled replica, I believe, of B-17, if I'm not wrong. If somehow I don't see his
Like, did you
welding
plan out?
work.
One of you, did you kind of plan out what you're gonna do, or just kind of show up and?
No, I did plan out. I tried to plan out for my stepson. He basically didn't like anything except TIG welding and gas welding. So he was going in the morning for gas welding, in the afternoon for TIG welding. And I went all kinds of sessions. Yeah. And I was curious if they would let him do it, and they were, of course, this is when you start, and if you keep doing it, you get to you'll be in the right spot. Yes, if actually I think I just didn't include it in the album, so it should be in this big blob of all the pictures.
Well, the pipeline welders, they're specialized welders, 150 a year. If I'm not mistaken, top.
Yeah, that's a.
20
And
and 50 a year.
I think it's his, deep diving cert.
And deep diving welding is even more expensive,
And dangerous.
and the most one of the most dangerous. So I went to all kinds of sessions. I attended very eye-opening to me when I connected some of the missing dots was Proficiency Center they launched at Oshkosh called Learn to Turn. So when I was learning to fly, it was never mentioned the role of elevator in a turn. And they broke it down into such a good detail. And then we had a simulator session when I learned to turn just with elevator. That was fun. You kind of, then I realized, well, I did it when I flew it, especially when you do a steep turn, that's where you'll use it the most, right? But then apparently, like when you do a loop, this is the turn too, just without any input from ailerons. So it was fun. I went to maintenance workshops. I went to special interest workshops. Ah, here it is. So he did what's called the ring of steel around the structure, which based on feedback he received was very good. And the guy who ran the shop said this is the first time in a few years when someone actually managed this kind of work and on a fourth day of a workshop. I was proud of him actually. So that's all. Hopefully it was interesting. Thank you. Everybody online, hopefully you didn't fall asleep. Any questions from the group online? Good. A quick update, which I should have done in the beginning of the meeting. We have good influx of funds for proficiency flying. So we can fly up to 2 times a month for August and September on proficiency profiles. The thorough debriefing is required, the pre-planning is required, and any pilot already on boarded, use it or we're gonna lose it. So that's, I think, very important. Please use these funds, fly proficiency missions, no restrictions other than 2 times a month. Well, that's a good question. We can ask if we can use those funds for more of the onboarding flights. those are separate, but the funds maybe come from the same bucket, so we can, doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah, you can ask Terry, and he will clarify. I also need maybe one more flight with 182 and G1000 just before I do Form 5 on it. All right, thank you everybody. Meeting is over. Next meeting is safety meeting. Yeah, second.
Oh, yeah.